If you believe that human beings first started wearing clothes to protect themselves from the freezing cold, you are severely underestimating the complexity of your own brain. The narrative we have all been fed is simple and logical. We lost our dense fur, the ice ages rolled in, and to avoid freezing to death, we skinned animals and wrapped ourselves in their fur. It makes perfect sense. But evolutionary biology rarely cares about what makes simple sense. If warmth was the driving force behind the invention of clothing, humanity has a massive, glaring hole in its timeline. Anatomically modern humans, creatures with the exact same brain capacity and physical structure as you, have been walking this earth for roughly 300,000 years. For more than half of that existence, these early humans wandered through savannas, endured freezing desert nights, and migrated across continents completely naked. If clothing was an urgent biological necessity for thermal regulation, it would have appeared alongside the control of fire. It did not. To find the true origin of when we started wearing clothes, we cannot look at the sky or the climate. We have to look at a parasite, specifically Pediculus humanus corporis, the human body louse. For millions of years, the ancestors of lice lived exclusively in the dense hair of early hominids. But modern human head lice and body lice are genetically distinct. Head lice are adapted to cling to cylindrical strands of hair. Body lice, however, have claws specifically evolved to grasp onto woven fibers in animal hides. They physically cannot survive without clothing. In 2003, evolutionary geneticists sequenced the DNA of both species. To calculate the exact moment they split into two separate evolutionary trees, that genetic divergence happened approximately 170,000 years ago, long before the peak of the last glacial maximum. While humans were still heavily concentrated in the warm climates of Africa, this tiny parasite underwent a radical mutation because humans had started consistently draping themselves in material. This biological time stomp completely shatters the temperature argument. We're wearing clothes in the tropics. If it was not for the cold, the next logical assumption is physical protection. The ancient world was a landscape of thorns, jagged rocks, and venomous insects. It seems reasonable that humans would want a layer of armor. But this explanation collapses the moment you examine human anatomy and the historical fossil record of early garments. If protection was the primary motivation, early humans would have prioritized covering the parts of the body that suffered the most environmental trauma. They are bipedal creatures. Our feet were constantly lacerated by stones. Our hands were battered by tool-making and foraging. Yet the earliest forms of human clothing, across almost every isolated ancient culture, did not cover the extremities. They covered the torso and the groin. We left our most vulnerable, damage-prone limbs completely exposed and instead chose to wrap the areas of our body that were naturally the most shielded. This brings us to a profound realization. The first person to drape an animal pelt over their shoulders was not solving a physical problem. They were solving a psychological one. They were executing an advanced cognitive function that no other creature on this planet has ever achieved. In 2009, researchers analyzing the cognitive archaeology of clothing proposed a groundbreaking framework. So where clothing, an organism must possess a neurological capacity known as mental time travel. If a chimpanzee feels cold, it might huddle or seek shelter in the present moment. But a chimpanzee will never look at a dead antelope, visualize a hypothetical scenario 3 weeks in the future where the temperature drops, conceptualize a multi-step process to skin the animal, cure the hide, to prevent putrefaction, and shape it to fit its body. To invent clothing requires executive function. It requires working memory, delayed gratification, and the ability to project an avatar of yourself into a future timeline. When early humans began scraping hides 170,000 years ago, it was one of the first physical manifestations of a mind that had decoupled from the present moment. But even mental time travel does not explain the specific choice to cover the torso and groin. Nor does it explain why cultures living in sweltering equatorial rainforests, where clothing is an active thermal disadvantage, still engaged in elaborate body modification, wearing belts, fibers, and permanent tattoos. To understand the true genesis of clothing, you have to look at the darkest, most uniquely human emotion embedded in our neurology: shame. This is not shame in the modern, moralistic, or religious sense. This is neurological shame. It is the sudden, terrifying dawn of self-awareness. Psychologists refer to this cognitive milestone as theory of mind. It is the ability to recognize that other beings have their own independent thoughts, beliefs, and perceptions. For millions of years of evolution, animals existed in a state of pure subjectivity. A wolf does not know it is a wolf. A wolf does not wonder what the deer thinks of its posture. But somewhere in the evolutionary leap of Homo sapiens, a switch was flipped. We developed the neurological architecture to step outside of our own consciousness and look back at ourselves through the eyes of someone else. We realized that we were being perceived. The weight of the gaze is a heavy evolutionary burden. The moment you realize that your body is being observed, evaluated, and judged by the minds around you, your body ceases to be just a biological vehicle. It becomes a billboard. It becomes a surface that broadcasts information about your age, your health, your fertility, and your vulnerability. The impulse to cover the groin and the torso was not about hiding from the cold. It was an attempt to seize control of the narrative. It was the first act of information censorship in human history. By covering the most intimate, biologically revealing parts of the anatomy, early humans were taking back control over what others could know about them. But this newfound self-awareness collided with another massive evolutionary crisis. As human intelligence expanded, so did our social structures. Evolutionary anthropologists often point to Dunbar's number, cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships. For human beings, the architecture of our neocortex caps that number at roughly 150. In a small band of 30 hunter-gatherers, everyone knows everyone. You know who the best hunter is, who the leader is, who is trustworthy, and who is dangerous. You do not need visual cues, because you have personal history. But around the time clothing became widely adopted, human tribes were expanding, they were merging. Suddenly, early humans found themselves interacting with groups of 200, 300, or 500 individuals. You are now sharing resources and campfires with strangers. In a society that exceeds Dunbar's number without a system to establish order, the result is paranoia, violence, and collapse. You cannot possibly remember the social status of 300 people. Clothing became the technological solution to the biological limit of the human brain. It was humanity's first broadband communication network, long before written language, and likely evolving alongside spoken language. Clothing served as a high-speed data transfer system. If an unfamiliar human walked into a camp, their garments instantly downloaded crucial data into the brains of everyone watching. The rarity of the animal pelt, the complexity of the woven fibers, the presence of specific bone ornaments, these were not aesthetic choices. They were a sophisticated code. They communicated dominance, tribal affiliation, mating availability, and hierarchy. You did not have to speak to the stranger to know if you should bow to them, trade with them, or kill them. Their clothing had already spoken for them. This is why the impulse to dress accelerates drastically during periods of societal complexity. Clothing is a social technology. It allows large groups of anonymous individuals to cooperate peacefully by creating visible, instantly recognizable categories of human beings. When a human draped a leopard skin over their chest, they were not just keeping the wind off their back. They were constructing an identity. They were manipulating the theory of mind of every single person who looked at them, forcing the tribe to perceive them not as just another vulnerable ape, but as a predator, a leader, a force of nature. But the most fascinating aspect of this evolutionary behavioral shift is that it did not just change how other people saw the wearer. It literally changed the brain chemistry of the person wearing the clothes. In 2012, a team of psychological researchers at Northwestern University conducted a landmark study that unveiled a phenomenon called enclothed cognition. The researchers gathered a group of participants and gave them tests designed to measure intense psychological focus and sustained attention. Half the participants performed the tasks in their normal street clothes. The other half were given a standard white laboratory coat to wear. The individuals wearing the white lab coats made half as many errors as those in their street clothes. Their brains became sharper, more rigorous, and deeply analytical. But the researchers added a brilliant twist. They brought in a new group and gave them the exact same white coats. However, they told this group that the garment was not a doctor's lab coat, but rather a painter's smock. When these participants took the test, their cognitive performance did not improve at all. It remained entirely average. The physical fabric was identical. The thermal protection was identical. The only thing that changed was the symbolic meaning attached to the garment. The human brain is so deeply wired to associate clothing with identity that wearing a specific garment triggers a neurological simulation. When you put on a piece of clothing that represents intelligence, power, or agility, your brain releases neurotransmitters to align your actual cognitive state with the symbolic nature of the fabric. You do not just wear the clothes. You biologically inhabit the persona they represent. This implies something staggering about our ancestors. When an early human wore the teeth of a predator or the heavy hide of a massive beast, they were not merely signaling dominance to the tribe. They were hacking their own nervous system. The garments lowered their baseline anxiety, increased their physiological confidence, and fundamentally altered their perception of their own capabilities. Clothing was the earliest form of cognitive enhancement. We dressed ourselves to become the apex predators we biologically were not. Every single day you participate in this ancient, unbroken chain of psychological manipulation. You open a closet filled with woven fibers, synthetic polymers, and dyed textiles. You look at the weather. Yes, you look at your schedule. But underneath that mundane morning routine, an incredibly complex neurological calculation is taking place. Your neocortex is running a simulation of the day ahead. You're predicting who you will encounter. You are calculating their potential perception of you. You are navigating the boundaries of your workplace, your social circle, and your cultural hierarchy. When you overdress for an event and feel that sudden, sharp spike of anxiety, that is not a modern insecurity. That is your primitive brain sounding an alarm that you have broadcasted the wrong social data to the tribe, making yourself an anomaly, a target. When you put on a tailored suit, a heavy leather jacket, or a specific brand of athletic wear, and you instantly feel your posture straighten and your confidence surge. You are experiencing the exact same cognitive hack as a hunter putting on a wolf, pelt 170,000 years ago. We did not start wearing clothes because we were cold. We started wearing clothes because we woke up. We became terrifyingly aware of the eyes of the world upon us, and we realized that whoever controls the visual narrative controls reality. You are not just putting on fabric to survive the elements. You are constructing a character. You're writing the code that tells the world exactly who you want to be today.